Sandra, and I do these videos from time to time, just whenever I really kind of have the time and feel like it or whatever. And a um, a friend of mine asked me to answer some questions because the thing about me, and something that I've actually kind of been proud of over the course of my transition, is that I've been very vocal about what I'm going through, and maybe even to a point of oversharing. But at any rate, I'm not one of those people that is very guarding with their information. In fact, I'm very open about answering most questions. There are some things that I would rather not answer, but for the most part, I'm pretty good about answering questions. And so I was given a list of some of the questions that people get. Now, I have to say that in no way, shape, or form am I a professional in any field as far as any of this is concerned. I am not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I'm not an endocrinologist. I have no medical training at all. All I have is myself. And I know what I've gone through. I know what I had to go through. And I know what I chose to go through. And that is what I'm basing the answers to my questions on. Only my own experience and what little experience I can take from some of my other friends. So, with that in mind, bearing in mind, I'm not giving medical information or advice. I'm just basing it on some of the things that I personally know. Here are some questions that I've been given. What does it mean to be transgender? Well, that's rather complicated. I mean, as far as I'm concerned anyway. I'm sure you can just go to Google and look up what's it mean to be transgender and find a myriad of different answers. But to me, I mean, just from a personal perspective, um, it means that you're kind of at a place that your whole life you feel like you've been inside a prison of your own body, and that you really can't express yourself the way you want to. You really can't be who you want to be. You can't act the way you want to act. You're indoctrinated to be what the world expects you to be. If you're like myself and assigned male at birth, then it means that you're indoctrinated to be a guy. You're indoctrinated to be a man, and therefore you have to subscribe to certain beliefs, mentalities, and actions and mannerisms, whether you realize it or not. And before you know it, you're doing things that you didn't anticipate doing or didn't expect that you would do. Like, when I was a man, I had a beard, and I worked in industries that were typically male dominated. And I know a lot of things that males know, and I do a lot of things that males do. And I walk a certain way, I talk a certain way, I act a certain way, I even sit a certain way. That is, for the most part, indicative of being male, because that's what I knew growing up. I didn't start transitioning until I was 42, and so most of my life I've had that indoctrination, and therefore right now I'm still working on trying to get past some of that. And it's not nearly as easy as you might think, because you're taught your whole life that either through actions or through actual instruction that this is how you're supposed to act. This is how you're supposed to behave. This is how you're supposed to sit, how you're supposed to walk, stand, put your hands, whatever. And there are so many minor, tiny little things that go along with that that you don't really even realize you're doing until somebody else calls you out on it. And I'm still in that process, and it's going to be a while before I get past that. Moving on. How does someone know that they're transgender? This one's easy for me, because I've known since I've been old enough to have rational thought that I was transgender. I just didn't know what it was, because when I was younger, there were no people like me. I mean, they existed, but they weren't prevalent, and they weren't in media. We didn't have access to the internet. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have access to anybody else that was like me. So I really thought that for a long time, I thought I was the only one, and therefore there must be something wrong with me. And even the early examples that I saw of people being transgender were by and large jokes. They were on daytime talk shows, like Maury Povich and Ricky Lake, and they were the butt of jokes. And when I saw that as being, that was literally my first introduction to somebody who was like me. And seeing that, it really made me climb way back into my shell. And that's why I never told anyone when I was a child that, hey, I'm really a girl, because that's not possible. I mean, and when we were kids, there were no such things as transgender people. So I mean, again, there were, but we didn't know that. And coming from a small town, it just seemed like it's totally out of the realm of possibility. But as far as how you know you're transgender, I can't speak to your particular experiences. I can't speak to how you have to feel to be transgender. I mean, basically, if you think you are, you are. That's the general consensus. And I've known that I was transgender since I was very, very young, and only later did I learn that that's an actual thing. So that's my story. So there you go. Why don't transgender people get counseling to accept the gender they were assigned at birth? Really? Really? Okay. Conversion therapy, as it's generally called. I live in Indiana, and because we have, oh, well, I hate to say this. Our former governor is Mike Pence, who, as I'm sure you know, was the vice president for a while. And he was very outspoken for a short time about gender conversion therapy and gender and sexual orientation conversion therapy. And it's a dangerous, dangerous thing to do, to make somebody question the core beliefs that they've grown up believing their whole lives, the way that they identify, the way they look at themselves, the way they believe, to make people think that that's wrong and that that's undesirable and that that's bad is dangerous to a person's mental health. And to try to say that, if I got counseling, I could just accept who I was. I got counseling, and the counseling wasn't for that. I didn't go specifically to say, hey, I want you to reinforce, who I am, and make sure you tell me that, no, I'm a boy, and therefore I can't want these things that I want. I went in with an open mind, and I went in thinking that I really just want to talk about what's going on with my life. And within the course of a few minutes, the doctor was able to say that, oh, I believe you have gender dysphoria. And at the same time, it was both music to my ears because I was so elated that somebody else saw it, but also it was almost like, it felt like a death sentence. They were giving me a diagnosis, and it was, I had to do something, and I had to change myself. And you don't have to, by the way. I chose to transition, but not everyone who considers themselves transgender transitions. Some people just live with it, and they deal with it their own ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I looked at it as being, this could be the worst thing ever, that I have to deal with this problem that I knew I had all along, but didn't really have a name for it. And when it has a name, it just becomes that much more real. So that's the best way I can describe that. What does gender transition mean? Well, again, for me, it meant I started hormone replacement therapy, which includes testosterone blockers and estrogen. At first, it was estrogen pills, and now it's estrogen injections. But it includes that, and it includes whatever else you want it to include. And it doesn't have to include hormones. It doesn't have to include any kind of body modification. You don't have to have surgeries. You don't have to have treatments or any. You don't have to do anything. If you want to be transgender, if you are transgender, then you are. Whether you change yourself or not, whether you take hormones or whether you have surgery or whether you change the way you dress, it doesn't matter. You're transgender because you consider yourself that way. Again, from personal experience, I decided to transition, and I did that because I absolutely hated myself. And I hated the way I looked. I hated the way I acted. I hated the way I felt. I hated everything about myself. And since I started transitioning, which I've been in transition now for almost 2 years, it'll be 2 years in May. And since I started, I can honestly say that I am so much happier. Colors are brighter, music is more beautiful. It's just the whole world just seems so much better now that I've started my transition. But again, for me, transitioning meant that I started hormone replacement therapy, and I'll continue that the rest of my life. I also went to therapy, and I decided to have certain body modifications done. For the record, I've had 3 total body modification surgeries. One was my vocal surgery. I had that done in March of last year. And also last year in October, I had body contouring surgery and breast augmentation. So that's where I am, and there are other things that I'm still looking at, possibly maybe down the road doing. I don't really like the idea of surgery. I'd prefer it if, the medication just kind of did everything it needed to do, but unfortunately, it doesn't do everything. You have to take certain things into your own hands, and therefore, there are a couple of things I might do down the road. I'd really like to do just a little bit of facial feminization because I know what I look like. I'm not trying to kid myself. Um, and also, I have absolutely no butt, so it would be nice to have a butt. But other than that, I think I'm actually in a pretty good place right now, and I'm happy with where I am right now. That I don't really need to have anything else done, but if somehow I happened upon the money and the time for recovery and the unmitigated goal to go through with it, then yeah, I might do a few more things. Um, what are some of the official records transgender people may change when they're transitioning? Again, I speak only from personal experience. Um, in July of 2019, I went to court to have my name and gender changed. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I was absolutely convinced that the judge was going to turn me down, and I looked awful. I really did. Oh wow, I looked so awful. Um, I did the best I could with what I was working with, but I had no hair, and so I wore a wig, and it was a god awful wig. Um, I wore a nice pair of slacks and a pair of open top flats and a nice, I believe it was a purple top. And I thought I looked pretty okay. I mean, I had somebody else do my makeup because I wasn't all that versed in it at the time, and I think considering what I was working with, I looked okay. But I don't think I was fooling anybody. I don't think anybody who walked by me said, "Oh, that's just another girl." They walked by me and said, "Oh, that's obviously a dude in drag." And that hurts a little, but I was so nervous that I sweat through my shoes. I can't. I've never had an issue where I sweat through my shoes before, and I totally did. Now, granted, it was July, but still, I think it was more nerves than anything else. Um, but anyway, I went to court, and the judge was insanely nice. She was so incredibly wonderful. She brought us back into her private chambers, and she asked some standard questions. She asked me if the spelling of my name was right on my petition, and it was. And she asked me why I wanted to change my gender, to which I replied, because that's how I feel. And she goes, okay, that was it. I mean, just as easy as that. Well, she signed the paperwork, and it was put into public record. And from that point, I went directly across the street from our courthouse is our Social Security office. So I went over there, and I applied for a new Social Security card under my new name. Um, I waited until I got that. I think it took a few days to get that back. And then I went to the BMV, and I had my driver's license changed, which was a whole thing to do. I mean, the poor fellow that I dealt with at the BMV, he had never dealt with anything like this before. He had no idea what to do. And the issue was that most of the information that I had, most of my other documentation, depended on my old name. So I couldn't leave them my old ID. I had to get both the new ID and the old ID so that, if I went to get something out of my bank account, I would have my old ID that matched the bank account until I could get that changed. And it took going to a supervisor and going to a different supervisor, and it was a whole to-do, and it took forever. But when it was all over, I had a new driver's license with my new photograph, my new name, my new gender. Everything was wonderful. And again, it was a terrible photograph. And I still have that ID, but I do not show it to a whole lot of people. Um, Past that, I mean, there's just the other stuff like you can change your marriage license if you want. That's something I honestly haven't bothered to do yet. I am married. I've been married for about 15 years to the most wonderful woman in the world. And she is the most understanding, wonderful, interesting, funny, amazing person in the world. And the fact that she's still with me is nothing short of miraculous, but that's neither here nor there. My point is, I haven't updated my marriage certificate to reflect my new name. You can get your high school transcripts, your diplomas, your college diploma, any kind of professional certification. You can get all that changed, and things like credit cards and your credit reports and things like that. Those have to be changed too, as well as your birth certificate, which in my case was actually something of a problem because apparently where I was born, they're not beholden to doing what's according to the law. Um, in Indiana, the Indiana law states that if you have a court order that says that this is your correct name and gender, then they're required to change it on my birth certificate. In addition to that, the judge actually put on the court order that she ordered for my birth certificate to be changed. Well, I did all the things you were supposed to do. I sent in my documentation, I sent in my money, I sent in a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I never got the new birth certificate. Well, I called and called and called, and I finally got a hold of somebody, and she said, I really don't like the idea of doing this. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. It's the law. So you have to do your job. And finally, it took me telling her, after probably 5 conversations, that if she didn't do what I asked her to do, I was going to have her held in violation of a court order. And finally, she just said, fine, I'll do it, but I'm not happy about it, which, again, I don't care if you're happy or not. Do your job. But those are some of the things that you'll have to change, or that you can change if you want to. What medical treatments do some transgender people seek when transitioning? Again, this is very subjective. I mean, everybody's different. Some people don't do anything. They are perfectly fine with the way they look, the way that their bodies are, the way that they sound, whatever. They're perfectly fine with that, and therefore they don't do anything, and more power to them. If that's what they want to do, then that's great. I did not fall into that category because I needed some work. Every single thing about me was incredibly male. I had no hair. I had a beard. I had one of the more masculine faces I've ever seen. Everything about me just screamed, this is a guy. And so, yeah, I had to have some work done. Again, I'm in a pretty good place now. I've had a little bit of work done, but I don't think I need a whole bunch more. And even if I get nothing more, I'm still pretty happy with where I am. So it's entirely up to you. Some people do these things. There are even surgeries where you can get your shoulders brought in a little. You can get, you can get, if you're a transgender woman, you can have hair removal done with lasers or with, whatever that other thing is called, where they pull the hair out with electricity, electrolysis, yeah. You can have breast augmentation, you can have body contouring, you can have hip implants or cheek implants or nose implants, or you can have facial work done, you can have body work done, you can have any number of things you can imagine. There are so many things that you could possibly do if you wanted to and you had the resources to do it. But again, it's entirely subjective. It's entirely up to the person. If they want to have all that stuff done and they can afford it and they have the time to recover, great, go for it. If not, also great. It's entirely up to you. What is gender dysphoria? Excuse me. This is one that calls for a cigarette. Okay, so, and by the way, I should not be smoking. Taking hormones and being a smoker are very, very bad combination. It's a very, very bad combination, so it's definitely not advised. Don't be like me. So what is just gender dysphoria? Gender dysphoria is, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dictionary, I'm just going based on what I know. Gender dysphoria to me is knowing that you're not right, knowing that something isn't right about you, and striving to figure out how to address it and what to do and how to live your life. Because I didn't know much about myself going into everything. I knew that I wasn't a guy, and I knew that I was a woman. I knew I was female, and what I didn't know is to what extent that really affected me. And it affected me a lot. And gender dysphoria is typically, and not all transgender people get gender dysphoria. I did, and I got it pretty badly. I hated the person that I was, and it was incredibly distressing to the point of being crippling depression about having to live my life. I mean, just day to day, every day, just being me was a source of depression for me, and not being able to be who I wanted to be and who I really thought I should be was, yeah, it was hard to deal with. And that was my first diagnosis, gender dysphoria. And I was, again, just so confused about it at the time that I didn't know how to respond. It was just, well, I have this now, so what do I do with it? And it's not something to be taken lightly. It is something that can be overcome. I mean, if you choose to overcome it, if you want to, if you don't want to consider yourself transgender, but you have gender dysphoria, you can get through it just like anything else. I mean, you can suffer through depression, you can suffer through anxiety. It's not pleasant, but you can do it. Um, Sadly, though, people who have gender dysphoria who don't address it in some way generally don't have particularly fruitful lives. And that's just from what I've seen. And again, I don't have numbers or statistics on that, but by and large, what I've seen is that people who don't do something about it, whether it's gender dysphoria, depression, anxiety, whatever, if they don't do something about it, it generally causes issues later in life. So it's better to do something, even if it's just talk to a therapist. And the last question that I have here is, why is gender equality important? Ha. Hmm. Well, let me put it this way. There are times, there are way more times than I really wish I had to admit to, that I have a genuine fear for my own safety. That living in the United States, living in Indiana, particularly the last 4 years, not to mention any names, Trump, that I did genuinely feel like I could be in danger for doing something as pedestrian as going to the restroom or shopping in the ladies' department or what, just being somewhere, anywhere. It doesn't matter if it was, just on the sidewalk or at a bar or whatever. That just my existence was an offense to somebody else. And I saw certain looks, certain actions, certain gestures that indicate that I'm not in a safe place right now. One example of that is in Las Vegas. Zan and I went to Vegas a few times, and the most recent time we went, I went as myself, finally, the first time I ever got to be in Vegas as Cassandra. And it was a wonderful experience right up until the very end. We got to McCarran Airport and we're waiting for our flight. And I said I have to go to the restroom. So I went to the restroom. I was on my way to the restroom, and I was stopped by a group of college-age girls that said that apparently I don't know how to read, that, this says ladies' room and that I'm going to the wrong place. I just ignored them. I went in, I did what I needed to do, and I came back out. But when I came back out, they were still there. And they ended up following me all the way back to my terminal, calling me names and insulting me. And just, they were very uncomfortably close to me, that I genuinely felt at risk, that, I felt I was in danger. I tried to find airport security somewhere, and I never did. But I managed to get far enough away where they just gave up and stopped following me. And then it was no big deal. But there was that few moments where I was panic stricken and having horrible anxiety about all of this, and I really thought that something bad could happen. And that's not something that happens infrequently. That's something that happens a lot. If I'm out at Walmart and I suddenly have to go to the restroom, I have to gauge whether or not I really want to go to the restroom. That, if it's a busy day and there are a lot of people, maybe I can hold it until I get home. And that's, again, just for my own personal safety. I have no desire to go into the restroom and do anything nefarious or to do anything unseemly or whatever. I just go to the restroom to do what I do. But that's not the feeling people get. People think that I'm in there because I'm some kind of pervert, or that I'm trying to do something to somebody or to hurt somebody or to whatever. And I have no desire to do that. I'm just trying to do the same things that everybody else is doing. I'm just trying to use the restroom. And just that simple act is enough to make some people nervous, and sometimes to the point of being aggressive. And I don't really want to find myself in a situation that could easily have been avoided if I just waited until I got home. So, yeah, that's one of the reasons why gender equality is important. It's important for the same reasons why racial equality is important and sex equality is important. That we're all people. Everybody's the same. If you take off our skin, we're all the same color, and we all look the exact same. And I'm human just like anybody else. I may be a little weird, and I'll admit that freely. I could be the weirdest girl in the Midwest, which puts me high in the running for weirdest worldwide. But I don't think I'm all that different, really. Yes, I'm transgender, and I will freely admit that I'm transgender. But while that puts me in a different category of person, it doesn't take away the fact that I'm a person. And as such, I have certain what I would consider to be inalienable rights, not the least of which, according to our founding fathers, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that whole life and liberty part is the part that concerns me. Because there are people in the world who would take that away from me if they had the opportunity. So I hope that really addresses some of the bigger questions. There are obviously other questions, and when I look down at these, I'm just not going to answer these. There are some that are very, very personal, and I'm not going to get into that. As far as what procedures I'm going to do and what procedures I'm not going to do, and who I love and what I do with my body, these are very personal things, and I have no desire to answer them in a public forum. So that will be left out. And I mean, there's a chance that I might talk about some of that stuff later, but right now I'm just not comfortable with it. But I hope this helps to kind of understand a little bit more about not only me but people in my situation. And if you have anything you'd like to add to the things that I've said, and if anything stands out as being something with which you totally disagree, then by all means tell me. I'm perfectly open to criticism, and I am more than likely wrong about a few things. So, I mean, if I have to correct myself, I'll correct myself. I'm fine with that. I'm open to new suggestions. But these are just the things that I see and the way I believe, so take it for what it's worth. But anyway, that's all for today. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching my videos, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And I love you all. Bye.